Dr. Seralini's results. So we have given up our responsibility by our government agencies. As far as I know, the only product genetically modified that has ever been tested and found to be harmful and rejected is the RBGH, and I was responsible for it. So I'm just wondering, why is it being said that the US FDA doesn't have to do that? Because I think this is a wrong statement. It should be done if the studies are required under the law to be conducted for the lifetime of animals, rats and so forth, so that exclude that cancer is not caused. That has never been done. So I'm very perturbed by the fact of these statements being made that it's not necessary if somebody else will do it.
Yes. Did you hear? Okay.
We just heard another myth, that there haven't been long-term studies. There's a wonderful review article in 2012 by Schnell et al. That looked at 12 long-term studies and 12 multi-generational studies. And in fact, a paper last week just came out with another one of those. And the conclusion from those 24 long-term studies that apparently don't exist was the exact same conclusion I said before. There is no evidence to show that GM crops cause any undue harm to the animals. That's what the science says. That's why the regulatory agencies around the world universally accept the safety of GM crops and food.
Can I ask where those studies, who were they by? Were they by the companies, or were they by a totally independent and with a very...
You would have to look at the individual studies to see the funding.
That's what I can't find. That's what I've been searching for.
Okay. It's really interesting. I'd like to follow up on this because this is a key point. People often talk about the funding for studies, but why is it that the funding for studies is only looked at on one side of the equation? If you look at the studies that claim harm, and Seralini is a beautiful example. He was paid by Greenpeace and by the Leopold Foundation, which is an anti-GMO foundation. They gave him €1 million. There's no surprise why he came up with the evidence he did. His research, 3 times published, has been completely analyzed and rejected by global scientific opinion around the world. It's not good science.
Also, just to add one more point to that, Seralini released an anti-GMO book and an anti-GMO movie the same week that this study came out. In addition to that, he passed out the study to journalists and made them sign a non-disclosure agreement where they couldn't talk to any other scientists to get a third-party opinion. And why would you ever do that? That's not common scientific practice, and it's clear that he had very strong self-motivation in mind when he published those results.
I have a question for Mr. Widger. Was any of the 24 long-term feeding studies that you mentioned, were any of them performed by the regulatory agencies? Or
the tests that had to be done to determine those were dictated. The methods used to do those tests were dictated by international toxicology standards. And that's another area where Seralini fell down. He did not use the prescribed methods to do this type of testing. That's why his research was soundly rejected by regulatory agencies and health agencies around the world.
Thank you, but I did not get an answer to my question. Were any of the 24 long-term feeding studies that you mentioned performed by the regulatory agencies, particularly in the USA or in Canada?
I mentioned that before. The regulatory agencies don't actually do the testing themselves. They dictate which tests must be done.
I have some time constraints. There's a lady at the back with a question.
Hi, this is Angelique Wood. I'm from the Regional District Okanagan-Similkameen. And the questions around the Arctic apples introduction are really salient to our organic fruit growing industry. And there are many farmers who will say there is no impact physiologically, but they are concerned about trade. Anyway, my question is the assumption that it was 17 seeds in a crop next to 40,000 tested. And did you say that was in a 2-year period?
Over a 2-year period on the Washington field trial, we had 40,000 seeds were tested and 17 were found to have Arctic genetic material.
So do you have any prediction of what that would mean over a period of 5 to 10 years? Because I believe there would be quite exponential growth and passage.
There wouldn't be any exponential growth other than, you know, the fact that there'd be more Arctic trees planted. But these were, out of these 17 seeds, nearly all of them were found within a 60-foot radius. So these are blocks directly beside on the exact same orchard. So if we're talking, you know, Arctic apples are planted in a number of orchards in, say, Washington and Ontario and that kind of thing, unless you're planting organic blocks directly beside, and something I didn't get a chance to get into is the stewardship standards such as buffer rows, hive placement protocol, all these sorts of things are meant to mitigate the already low risk. And, you know, each year the apples are picked. And, you know, it's not like the seeds are, you know, keeping the genetic material inside that tree. Each year there's a new pollination, a new crop. So I don't see any reason why there would be an exponential growth unless you're assuming that there's Arctic apples all over the place with the trees growing directly beside organic trees. And even if that's the case, you know, as mentioned, no organic grower has ever been decertified, and it doesn't result in any impact whatsoever on the fruit itself.
Any other comments?
I want to add that it has been documented that a gene movement from GM papaya to organic papaya in Hawaii. It has been documented, and it will cause exponential contamination over time. There's absolutely no doubt about that. 2 years testing is really no testing at all.
Okay, we're getting close to 9 o'clock, Joanne. I just want you to be aware I'm happy to continue facilitating this, but I am sensitive to time. There was a gentleman that I noticed at the back. Do you have a microphone there? I need you to have a microphone, and Dawn has a question as well. So, Dawn, you ask your question and we'll get a microphone to this young man at the back.
Yeah, we try to have them in order here. We've kind of got them.
I'm sorry, am I out of order?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's this fellow with the hat here, right there. Okay. And then it's Bob, and then it's Peter.
So Dawn, then Bob, then Peter.
Okay, I guess it's kind of a comment, kind of a question, and listening to all the confusion and around the science, and I always think of Vandana Shiva, who's done a lot of work on seed sovereignty and the effects of GMO in India and around the world. And listening to her talk about the kind of the monocultures of the mind and the problems with, or the limitations of Western science to deal with the complexities. And I think in, you know, looking at food systems design we are deepening our understanding around a complexity science and all that what's emerging out of food systems design. But and as an Indigenous woman, and knowing how Western science, and not just Western science, but the politics and how it's killing our wild salmon. The Western science, since the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has been asserting full jurisdiction based on a Western scientific model, has failed. Our Western science, or our wild salmon, are very much endangered, and for a number of different reasons. But what I've heard Indigenous communities talk about is one of the main reasons is because there's the Environmental Assessment Act doesn't assess the cumulative impacts or the social, the spiritual, the cultural values. It is just, that's just not, I'm not hearing that anywhere in the conversation. So I guess in terms of not having a system that can adequately deal with understanding the cumulative impacts, if there's 17 seeds that are contaminated, then I say there's reason for a precautionary approach within it. So So I guess it is more a comment at this point, and I just don't see it. I don't see it, and I know that with science, it depends on the question and how you frame your question as to the kind of data you will get. So, and I know that happens, and I know that Monsanto and a lot of these genetic engineering proponents have huge research budgets, more huge than what Greenpeace can fund, even in one study or in a few studies. So I just want to put that out there, that it's
Thank you.
fairly in balance with the politics of it as well.
Appreciate that, Don.
So can I make a comment on that, since you directly addressed the seeds, just really quickly?
It will have to be really quick.
Okay, so when you say contaminate, if you have a Gala tree next to a Fuji tree, does the Gala tree contaminate the Fuji tree? No more so than an Arctic tree would contaminate. It's cross-pollination. It's how apples are pollinated. It's not a contamination. It's not a pollution. Our apples are just the same as every other apple. They don't have any new proteins. Kent earlier mentioned that we haven't had any third-party or independent testing. All of our testing was from third-party horticultural consultants. We are 7 employees. We can't do this testing ourselves. It's all from independent third-party specialists. And it's not contamination, it's pollination. So it's just the way you phrase the word.
Just a quick response. I didn't say that, actually. But when Gala pollinates Fuji, that's Malus domestica, pollinating Malus domestica. That has occurred for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and it's the way it's supposed to work. It's what makes a species, their ability to share their unique genome. The Arctic apple is not Malus domestica, period. It is a unique manufactured genome. End of discussion.
All right, I have Bob here, but I'm going to ask one question before I hand over the mic to Bob. My question is for Kent. We are already eating genetically modified corn and canola and some of these other things that are coming into our homes, mostly without us knowing about it. Why do you think it's so important to draw the line in the sand now about the GMO apple?
Because we didn't draw the line in the sand with GM cotton. Because we didn't draw the line in the sand with GM corn. Because we didn't draw the line in the sand with GM alfalfa. Because we didn't draw the line in the sand with GM soybeans. Because we have not asked for the proper long-term science to evaluate the implications of this, the largest biological experiment that has ever been put forth. And I want to say I'm old enough to have danced in clouds of DDT as a child. Illegal now. I'm old enough to have